Hi, I'm Scarlet Android. Two Spies is a Cold War themed two-player online mobile game for Apple devices where your mission is to strike your target. You use actions, special abilities, strategies, and mind games to travel around Europe as you locate and strike your opponent. Two Spies is very easy to learn but incredibly difficult to master. I'll be your personal spy guiding you through your first mission in Europe. I've been playing Two Spies for over a year and a half, and over the time period I've won over 1,800 games and was actually sent a trophy from the developers after I was the top ranked agent at the end of Season 1. I put the googly eyes on it myself. With all of my Two Spies experience and the fact that no one else wants to make one, I think I'm the perfect secret agent to make a tutorial on my favorite game. Whether you've never heard of Two Spies, you're a consistent player who just can't seem to rank up, or you're a top player that just enjoys some Two Spies, this tutorial will cater to all and will make you one step ahead of your target. Welcome to the Two Spies tutorial. We'll start with a general premise. You are a new recruit in the middle of the Cold War. Tensions high between the US and the USSR, with Europe being the battleground. Your goal is to become a secret agent and fight the enemy in Europe, but the other recruits want that job for themselves. Your commanders can't just send all the new recruits out to Europe and let you all be killed, so they've devised a plan to train you. Two Spies. One day you will take out the world's most ruthless agents. Today, you will take out each other. You and your fellow recruit are set against each other, and you need to locate and strike your opponent 3 times to secure a victory and inch closer to becoming a real secret agent. You travel through Europe, collect intel on where your opponent is hiding, use your intel to get actions that allow you to find your target, and then strike them when they least expect it. When you win a match, you become closer and closer to the next rank, but then you start to face smarter and craftier spies. If you lose, then you fall down the ladder and may get a letter from HQ that you were moved down a rank. Every recruit is competing to eventually become the best spy of the bunch and become an actual spy in Cold War Europe. And apparently, you've come to me for a little help. Let's move into some gameplay. A round of Two Spies is played on a map of Europe with different cities that you can travel to. You and your opponent are both represented by pins. For this example, you get the standard blue pin, we'll call him Bob, and your opponent will be the standard orange pin, we'll call her Alice. Each turn you'll get 2 actions to spend on movements or abilities to try to find and strike your opponent. After you use your 2 actions, it's your opponent's turn and they get to use their 2 actions. Your actions are represented with these lightning bolts. The first action we'll go over is Strike. Striking is the winning condition. If you are in the same city as your opponent and you strike, you win, no matter what. Every round of Two Spies will end with you or your opponent getting struck. But how do you get into a city to strike someone, I hear you asking? Well, there's this little thing called moving. You travel by dragging your pin to an adjacent city that is connected to your current city by a road. Just slide it over and bam, you're in Brussels. And now, bam, you're in Berlin. Gosh, is it nice this time of year. With superhuman speed, you're able to travel all across Europe. When you move into a different city, you are in cover. Your opponent doesn't know where you are and are shown all the cities where you could theoretically be. You move once, and you can be in any of these cities. You move twice, and now you can be nearly anywhere in Europe. But there is a risk to moving. If you land in the same city as your opponent and end your turn, then your cover will be blown. They'll silently strike you, which will send your dream of becoming a world-class secret agent straight down the toilet. If you don't want to risk being an easy target, then you can just use Wait. Just slide up that little card and you'll stay in the same place, but with the illusion that you move. So right now, you're not going anywhere, but your opponent thinks you can be in any of these places. To prevent Two Spies from becoming a simple game of cat and mouse, there's the option to control. Controlling a city has 2 main benefits. If your opponent travels to that city, their cover will be blown and you will know exactly where they are. This allows them less travel space and is an obnoxious obstacle that they can't do much about. And the second benefit is controlled cities generate intel for you. Intel is the currency system of Two Spies, and controlling a city increases the amount of intel you earn per turn. We'll get more into intel a little later, but intel is incredibly important for Two Spies and is how you're able to buy the 6 other actions that I'm about to dive into. Action number 1 is Locate. Locate, as the name implies, locates where your opponent is, blowing their cover. It costs 10 intel and it's pretty self-explanatory. You're not able to strike them because you don't have enough actions to move and strike, but it shows you where they are and you can base your future decisions off of where they are now. Our next action is Strike Reports. Strike Reports is a one-time purchase of 10 intel which blows the cover of an opponent if they strike. When your opponent strikes without Strike Reports, you see this screen. Because your target can be striking any of these cities, and if they miss, you still need to figure out where they are. But with Strike Reports, if they miss a strike, it's game over. Their cover is blown, and you get the easy win. Strike Reports, along with the other two actions on the top row, are one-time purchases whose abilities will remain activated for the rest of the round. Right next to Strike Reports sits Rapid Recon. Costing 40 intel, after Rapid Recon is bought, if you move into the same city as your target, their cover is blown, and you have a free strike. It doesn't matter if they're in a controlled city, or they're being super sneaky. If you move to Berlin and your opponent is in Berlin, their cover will be blown and you'll get an easy win. After Rapid Recon is bought, it is active for the rest of the round, and the ability to get a free strike if you simply move to the same city as your opponent is well worth the hefty price of 40 intel. Now you're probably thinking, these last three actions have all blown my cover. Is there any way to make sure I can stay in cover for a turn? Well, my clever little spy, you'd be correct, because here is Deep Cover. Deep Cover costs 20 intel and makes you immune from your cover being blown. Your opponent can't locate you. Rapid Recon doesn't affect you. Strike Reports won't work if you strike, and you can sneak into your opponent's controlled cities. That last one is especially important because it allows you to end your turn in your opponent's city, the next turn control it and make it your own. This can lead to a massive shift in intel, with you gaining more intel per turn while they earn less, and territory, causing them to own less cities and have less places to travel. Being able to take your opponent's city and make it your own is the classic trope of any good territory board game, and going deep is a great way to do that in Two Spies. But it's not the only way. Preparing an action gives you another action to use during your next turn. On paper, that sounds pretty standard, but combined with Locate or Rapid Recon, it's a deadly combination. In low ranks, a simple Locate, Move, and Strike can win you countless matches, and in the higher ranks, it's used as a safer version of going deep, by moving, controlling, and then moving back into cover. Controlling also blows your opponent's cover, but that feature isn't useful with two actions. But after you prepare a third action, when you control, it either blows your opponent's cover and you get a free strike, or you turn one of their cities into your own, which is crucial during a game of Two Spies. Prepping can also be stacked, so you could start a turn with 3, 4, or even more actions if you have the intel for it. Preparing an action costs 40 intel, the same as Rapid Recon, but instead of being a long-term weapon, it can end a game immediately. And the last action remaining is Encryption. The last 5 actions, Locate, Strike Reports, Rapid Recon, Deep Cover, and Prep, each have a message that is sent to your opponent. When you locate, it tells your opponent you've located. When you buy Strike Reports, it tells your opponent you bought Strike Reports, and so on. Well, for just 25 intel, you can get rid of that tell and replace it with the cryptic message, Target spent intel on an operation. So now, if you have Encryption and buy an action, you could have done 5 different things that your opponent now has to worry about. Did you locate them? Or did you go deep and move into one of their cities? Or did you buy Rapid Recon and are now hunting them? Or did you prepare an action and are getting ready to land the final blow? With Encryption, your target has no idea. Encryption is what makes Two Spies a top-tier strategy game, because it introduces the mind games and mystery that all good strategy games need. You need to learn how to read your opponent, when to play it safe, when to be risky, and learn how to counter your opponent's move and then counter your opponent's counter. Now that we've finished all of the actions, let's dive deeper into Intel. Intel, as stated before, is the currency system of Two Spies. Any action that gives the players benefits, i.e. any actions on the right side of the screen, cost Intel. You start every round gaining 3 Intel per turn, and that number increases if you control more cities. So right now, I only control Rome, and earn 3 Intel per turn. But if I go over and control Monaco, now I'm earning 4 Intel per turn. However, on every map there are bonus cities. Bonus cities, highlighted in bold text, are worth 4 Intel per turn instead of 1. So right now we are earning 3 Intel per turn, then we control Berlin and we now earn 7 Intel per turn. Bonus cities are where most of the fighting occurs during the match, because they're worth the most intel, are generally in the center of the map,
and intel spawns in these cities most often. My biggest gripe about the in-game tutorial is that it doesn't mention bonus cities, which are what I consider to be the most important part of the game at the higher levels of Two Spies. Most games are won and lost based on how well you can control bonus cities and defend them, so all players who play Two Spies need to know about bonus cities. Anyway, my little bonus city tirade is over, but just remember that they are a huge deal in Two Spies. During a round, intel will periodically spawn in a city. If you land on these intel spawns, then in your next turn, you'll earn that amount of intel, but your cover will be blown. If no one picks up the 10 intel that spawns in the city, then there's a chance that it will increase by another 10, now to 20 intel. This keeps going until it caps out at 50 intel stored in one city. But sometimes instead of intel spawning, an action will spawn instead, and if you end your turn on the city, next turn your cover will be blown and you'll have 3 actions to use. Intel and actions are more likely to spawn in bonus cities than regular cities, and spawn randomly during a match. Intel and actions cannot spawn on a city that you or your opponent is currently in, so sometimes this can give you extra information to strike your opponent. After a couple of turns, territory will start to form, as both sides control cities on their side of the map. To prevent a game of Two Spies from going on forever, cities will start to shut down, starting from the outside and pushing in until eventually one city remains. Cities shutting down causes you to get closer and closer to your opponent until one of you is forced to strike. A city is shutting down if it becomes filled with a gray dot. If you hover over the city, it will say which turn it will shut down. 2 turns means that at the start of your next turn, you won't be able to move into it. Next turn means that at the end of your turn, the city will shut down, but you can still move into it this current turn. Cities that are shut down will still generate intel for you, but will not be available to travel to. You win a round of Two Spies by striking your opponent, but you win a game of Two Spies by winning 3 rounds, striking your opponent 3 times. Each competitive game has a maximum of 5 rounds, and there's nothing more intense than a round 5 where every move could win or lose you the game. Each round is played on a different map, with each map having different layouts, cities, and bonus cities. There are currently 11 different maps in Season 4 of Two Spies, and every new season, maps are added and thrown out.
And just like that, you know everything about playing a game of Two Spies. Bravo, new recruit. Albert Einstein never figured out how to play, and I hear Magnus Carlsen is still learning. But just because you learned how to play doesn't mean you play well. Now we'll move on to some strategy to help the newer players get a solid floor and to give the experienced players a higher ceiling. We'll start the strategy section by going over the basics of Two Spies, then moving on to some higher level strategies and skills. If you end your turn in the same city as your opponent, your cover will be blown and they will strike you. So try to avoid landing in cities where you think your opponent is. Avoid moving to bonus cities and intel spawns if your opponent could be there, because those cities are where players flock to the most. Landing in the same city as your opponent is the easiest way to lose a game of Two Spies, so there's no reason to gamble a round away just for a little intel. If you're not sure where they are, then locate them or wait in your own city. Additionally, if they are an aggressive, strikey kind of spy, don't be afraid to buy strike reports and make them sad. On the flip side, during your turn, move to cities that you think your opponent will move to. It sounds so simple on paper, but I've had so many wins where I go to a city, and my opponent goes to the same city, then I strike and win. Even at the highest level of Two Spies, it still happens. Move to bonus cities and intel spawns where you won't get struck, because there's a chance your opponent will give you a win on a silver platter. However, that can't be your only strategy when trying to get the win. No matter how much I hope and pray that my opponent lands in Budapest, if they start controlling cities, waiting, and locating, there isn't much I can do. Instead, you need to be controlling territory. At its best, Two Spies is a territorial game, with drawn battle lines and fights over cities. Whoever can control more bonus cities, or control cities where your opponents are forced to move to, will win the match. Controlling cities is your friend. If you go first during a round, go to a bonus city 90% of the time. Of course, you don't always do it, especially when there's a chance of being struck, but controlling a bonus city is the best way to start building territory. After you control your bonus city, start to control adjacent cities around it so that you have a nice foundation of territory. My goal when controlling territory is to control enough cities until I earn 10 intel per turn, or 12 intel per turn if I control 2 bonus cities. If you're able to play patiently and make it a territorial war, you've already got a big advantage over most low-ranked players. And the last big advice for our newer recruits is to stay in cover. Controlling on your second action blows your cover,
and it allows you to either easily be struck or allows them to start the turn with more information. Until you've played a couple hundred games and truly understand Two Spies, don't control during your second action. Always control and then move. Don't move and then control. Let's use this example. You've got a good bunch of territory going, and you decide you want to control Kiev. Now, if you move and control, your opponent knows you are in Kiev. They can now go deep into Berlin, Warsaw, or Vienna and control the city next turn, or just move to Berlin and Vienna and take your city this turn. Instead, if we just move and wait, your opponent doesn't know where you are, and they probably just try to control their cities instead of taking yours. Let's use one more example that always drives me nuts. This time, you get to go first. You've been taking notes diligently during the video and know that you're supposed to control a bonus city. So you move and control a bonus city. While I admire the thought, this isn't a good start. Looking at your opponent's side, they can safely move to London, Paris, Geneva, Monaco, Venice, Rome, and Vienna. While there is the threat of being struck in a couple of these cities, they won't immediately lose. Compare this to your opponent's side if you simply move and wait. While they can safely move to Paris, Monaco, and Rome, anywhere else you could be. Instead of having 7 different cities to move to without losing, they now have 3, which aren't very good cities either. This gives them more risk to move to the important cities, and they likely will need to strike to be safe in the cities they want to move to. This gives you an advantage next turn, even if you do control. In both of these examples, even though you weren't in danger when you controlled, you still made it easier for your opponent, so make sure to stay in cover. Don't locate or go deep on your final action either. There's just no reason to. Locate is used to give you information to make during your next action, so there is zero incentive to locate on your second move because you can't utilize that information. Going deep is most useful for going into your opponent's cities and staying in cover. When you buy it on your second action, your opponent knows that you didn't move into their city, so it's pretty pointless. So always buy locate or deep cover on your first action to properly use the ability. Every other action doesn't really matter what order when you buy it and move. It doesn't really matter if you buy strike reports and move, or move and buy strike reports, but it's good to get in the habit of buying an action and then moving. This does make a difference when you buy encryption, because if you move and buy an action instead of vice versa, they know you didn't go deep, which is part of what makes encryption so valuable. So if you're gonna buy an action, buy it during your first action. Obviously, you can strike during your last action if you think you know where they are, but if they have strike reports, do remember that if you miss, you're gonna lose. It always depends on the situation, but if they have strike reports, shy away from striking on your last action. It's just too risky.
That reminds me, have I talked about the secret 10th action? He's actually hiding behind his brother right now. He's a little shy. Let me just wait, and there we go. This is the fake strike. The fake strike is exactly what it sounds like. Instead of actually striking, you pretend to strike. This causes your opponent to believe that you are in a certain city where they will strike, then you strike that city and get an easy win. Fake strikes are often used at the beginning of the game, when you're trying to control bonus cities. For example, Berlin is the most important city on this map. However, during the game, my opponent has been very cautious, so I don't think they're in Berlin right now. However, I don't want to move right to Berlin and risk an instant loss, so I decided to fake strike. My opponent, who is in Warsaw, sees me striking and thinks that I struck the most important city on the map. Makes sense. They move to Berlin to strike, but you're not there. Now you move to Berlin and get an easy win. The fake strike can lead to some fantastic mind games during a game of Two Spies as you debate whether your opponent actually struck or if they faked. There are also other variations of fake strikes that are equally effective at bamboozling your target. For example, the double fake strike. So you just fake struck your opponent and won the round. Congrats. Next round they go first on the map, the Swiss Grinder. All 3 bonus cities are on the bottom left, and Geneva is the most important city on the map, connecting the 2 bonus cities to the Northern Territory. After the last round, your opponent doesn't want to go down 2 rounds without really playing, so they play it safe and end their turn in Paris. You decide to fake strike, but this time there's a twist. Your target knows you like to fake strike, so they decide to counter with their own fake strike. Aren't they clever? They don't think you're in Geneva, so they fake strike and are going to attack next turn. But because you're such a clever little spy, you realize they likely didn't buy your fake strike and fake struck themselves. Instead, you fake strike again. They think their plan worked and move to Geneva to strike, but they miss. You strike Geneva and win round 2 almost as fast as you won round 1. The double fake strike is the counter to a fake strike. and can be deadly if you get in your opponent's head. Now some of you might be thinking, wait, isn't that just the same as a regular strike? Because if you struck originally, you would have been fine. And yes, you would be correct. You would have been safe if you struck Geneva during your first turn. However, the double fake strike is a far safer alternative of striking. If they did strike Geneva after you struck Geneva, you would have lost the round. Whereas if you fake strike them, you're not dead. There's a good chance that they control and move to start building their territory, and you are still alive for the rest of the round, still with a chance to win. Now technically a triple fake strike and a quadruple fake strike and even a quintuple fake strike are plausible, but they aren't used very often and don't usually work. If you just keep fake striking, eventually your opponent is going to either control or buy strike reports, and you'll be at a disadvantage later because you haven't controlled any cities. So I usually stop with the double fake strikes. But fake strikes can also be combined with other tools to make them even more deadly, specifically intel spaces. Let's move on to the map Bifocal. Right now, intel has spawned in Warsaw while none is in Geneva. Our opponent decides to go for the intel in Warsaw, and now it's our turn. A 50-50 strike to win the round is pretty lame, and it's not a consistent way to win games, so we decide to fake strike. Their cover gets blown because they picked up intel, and they figure you struck Geneva, so they move to strike Geneva, and they miss. Now you move to Geneva and strike them for the win. Sounds pretty cool. Now let's have another scenario, where instead, they went to Geneva first. You fake strike and their cover is not blown, so now you know they're not in Warsaw. They strike thinking you struck Warsaw, but they miss. Now you can figure out that they struck Warsaw and get an easy win. That's the beauty of the intel strike. You base your strike off of whether or not their cover was blown and make your decision based on more information than just a random strike. Fake strikes are mind games, so their effectiveness will vary from opponent to opponent depending on if they play bold or if they play it safe. So to properly use them, you'll need to read your opponent and choose when to strike and when to fake strike. If you keep getting burned from strikes and fake strikes, the opponent might just be in your head. So instead, start controlling cities. Fake strikes are far less effective in a territorial war, and you can eliminate fake strikes entirely by just buying strike reports.
You also don't need to wait during a fake strike. In all my examples, I've been waiting in fake striking, but it works the same if you move to a city where your opponent can't be and strike. This can allow you to move closer toward important cities while keeping your opponent on edge, or surprising your opponent by striking where they wouldn't expect. And after 5 minutes, you've learned the intricacies of the fake strike. Fake strikes are extremely important because they allow you to get quick wins and also allow you to defend nearby bonus cities more effectively. Keeping your opponent honest with bonus cities is incredibly important during a game. There's no worse feeling in a round of Two Spies than when your opponent has controlled all of the bonus cities and you need to find a way to come back while they have better territory and are earning more intel than you. Fake striking keeps them on edge and makes them think twice about moving to your bonus city. And this leads us into the next big idea in Two Spies: game progression. I believe there are 3 main stages during a round of Two Spies: the early game, the mid game, and the end game. The early game is the portion of the round where you and your opponent fight for territory. You control bonus cities and adjacent cities to give you a good supply of intel and good territory for the mid game. The mid game is where you are trying to set up your territory for the end game, as cities start to shut down around you. This can be done by going deep and controlling your opponent's cities, or waiting and defending your own. The endgame is when few cities remain and you are trying to give yourself the best odds for a strike. Sometimes you and your opponent are so evenly matched that the round will come down to city shutdowns and luck, and this is where you need to give yourself the best chance to win. It's important to remember that you can win in all 3 of these stages, and a win is a win. It doesn't matter if a round lasts 10 seconds or 10 minutes, it's still only one round. The early game is where you want to use the strikes and fake strikes I've taught you. Bonus cities are incredibly important during a round, so don't be afraid to guard them. It's lame when you lose a round before it really develops, but it's even lamer when you get slowly suffocated by your opponent because you didn't play a strong enough early game. The rest of the early game is just building territory. Controlling adjacent cities gives you different safe places to end your turn and a steady stream of intel. You shouldn't be buying actions in the early game, unless you buy strike reports to ensure your safety. If you lose a round, you start the next round with 10 extra intel and get to go first, so sometimes you can buy strike reports to push your luck. Your opponent either moves twice and you get an important city easily with a chance to strike them with very little risk, or you can bait them into a strike and almost instantly win. The mid game is a little harder to define. It's really just the bridge between the early game and the end game, where you buy actions, expand and defend territory, and react to city shutdowns. The mid-game has the biggest learning curve in the game as well. Anyone can strike and fake strike. Anyone can go deep and go for a 50-50 at the end. But the ability to control your opponent's cities while also defending your own cities, while also staying in cover and managing intel is what separates the good spies from the great spies. The first advice for the mid-game is to not wander. Let me explain. Sometimes in your quest to control your territory, you will see some intel that you really want, or a city that looks nice this time of year, and you'll decide to end your turn there. Little do you realize that you've just blundered your bonus city. If you move 2 cities away from your bonus city, your opponent can locate and move into your city, then control next turn. You can't let this happen. It's not worth losing your bonus city for some intel or some other random city. Try to stay 1 city away from your bonus city to ensure that your opponent can't easily convert it, and if you think your opponent is wandering, give them a quick locate just to see. This scenario is the only time I'd suggest ending your turn out of cover. Additionally, just because there's intel on the ground doesn't mean you need to go for it. Newer players flock to intel spaces like moths flock to lamps. Just because your opponent isn't there right now doesn't mean they can't strike. Always be careful when picking up intel. And now you've just completed your territory. What should you do next? Well, you want to control your opponent's territory, and the way to do that is to go deep. You decide to dive headfirst into their bonus city and they strike you. Don't go deep into their bonus city the first chance you get. It's incredibly predictable and your opponent will likely strike you. If my opponent goes deep in this situation, what else would they be doing? They're obviously trying to control Berlin, so I'm just going to strike and win. If you're not going to control during your next turn, try to end your turn in one of your important cities, and if they go deep, strike during your first turn. They're just asking to be struck. So going deep doesn't work, but I still want to control my opponent's territory, so I'm going to prepare an action. This is a slightly better option because there's a low risk of being struck this turn, but prepping is also pretty predictable. You're either going to locate them, or you're going to control one of their cities, and these can both be countered by going deep. If your opponent goes deep, now you're not able to locate them, and they can now be defending their own cities or attacking yours. Now if I control Warsaw, where do I go? They might be deep in Warsaw to defend, or they could be in Geneva, Vienna, or Berlin ready to attack. That 40 intel you spent gets completely wasted, as there's tons of risks whenever you do anything useful. If your opponent preps, go deep, and usually don't go deep right into their bonus city. That's a very easy way to be struck. Just defend your territory or attack a minor city. So going deep and prepping both get countered. What if I locate? You buy locate and, well, they're in Geneva. You didn't really accomplish anything, and now are 10 intel poorer. Alright, so going deep, prepping, and locating didn't really work. What if I buy rapid recon? Well, that's definitely better, but not in the way that you're thinking. If my opponent buys rapid recon, I know that if they move into the same city as me, they're gonna win. So I'm gonna stay far back so I don't get struck. If your opponent has rapid recon, there's no reason to risk easily being found, so stay away from them. However, this opens up a new possibility. If my opponent is always 2 cities away from me, that allows me to go deep into their cities. Now it becomes a pretty straightforward bluff, where your opponent knows you're deep in their city, but can't do much about it, especially if you've bought strike reports. This is fairly one-dimensional, however, and gets decently countered by what you should be buying during the mid-game: encryption. Encryption introduces uncertainty in Two Spies, and uncertainty is exactly what you want during the mid-game. Encryption buffs all 5 actions that you can buy and is absolutely what you should be buying after you've formed your territory. With encryption, your opponent doesn't know if you've bought strike reports or rapid recon. With strike reports, your opponent now has to assume you did, because striking can become an instant loss. With rapid recon, now it becomes a surprise. If your opponent plays aggressively, you can move to their city and get an easy win. Prep and deep cover both become more secretive, because your opponent doesn't know what you did, and locate improves drastically once you've bought encryption. Locating your opponent without their knowledge leads to massive information, and you can defend your cities better if they go deep. Locate is also the cheapest action to buy, so if you want to make it look like you've gone deep, prepped, or bought an ability, you can locate. Chances are your opponent will spend more intel trying to counter your move, and they'll have less intel to defend themselves during their upcoming turns. You should be buying encryption during the mid-game. Games between Shadows and Double O's, the 2 highest ranks of the game, use encryption in almost every round, and while you don't need encryption to win, it certainly makes things easier. As the rest of the mid-game goes on, maybe you manage to control their bonus city, but they battle back and get yours. Eventually, as cities keep shutting down, you'll start to feel cramped, as there's only 7, 6, or 5 cities for both you and your opponent to travel to. That's when you know you're in the endgame. There's a lot less strategy during the endgame of Two Spies, because with so few cities remaining, almost every move is risky. Before, if I were to strike my own city, I would be able to retreat if I missed, and I'd be fine. This late into the game, however, there's nowhere to retreat to, and I'll just lose. With so much risk present, the only way to truly be safe is to go deep. The odds that you're going to make a play to win in this situation are very low, so it's better to just prolong the game for a 50-50 or wait for your opponent to make a mistake. The endgame is also where you can utilize a trick with city shutdowns. When a city is shutting down next turn, no one can travel to it for the rest of the game. However, right now, you're able to travel into it, so this city actually lets you be invincible for a turn, provided that your opponent isn't in the city. If you're ever in a bind for intel or safety, you can use these cities for cover, or you can use these cities for a free strike. Your opponent can move here next turn, so I might as well strike the city and hope to get lucky. The only downside of staying in shutdown cities is that you must move out of them next turn. This is okay in this situation, where I have two different cities to go deep in and be safe. It's not okay in this situation, where there's only one city for me to move to. Now my opponent knows I'm here and they can get a free win next turn. And the final part of the endgame is the strike. One of you has to take the opportunity to strike, and you're never going to get better odds than 50-50. But it's always better for you to be the one choosing the 50-50 rather than your opponent. Although it is mathematically a 50-50 chance you win, different factors like playstyle and experience can give you a better idea of where they are, so you want to be the one striking for the win rather than praying that your opponent misses. One final tip for the endgame is to go deep and wait. If you go deep in the same city as your opponent, their cover will be blown to you. If they're not in the same city as you, their cover won't be blown. In the endgame, it's always safer to be in a different city than your opponent, so going deep and waiting is a great idea if you don't know where your opponent is. Lower ranked players buy deep cover and feel like they have to move, but you don't. Moving doesn't make you any safer when you're in deep cover. All three stages of Two Spies are incredibly important, and if you want to rank up, you'll need to improve at all of them. And the last big strategy of this video is risk management. I'll keep this brief. One of the biggest strategies that newer players try is an all the marbles strike. I think my opponent is in Geneva, so I'm going to strike Geneva. They won't expect me to go into their city and strike. This can work, especially if you're good at predicting where your opponent is, but it's not consistent. You automatically lose if you miss, so you better get it right. If you want to get better at Two Spies, going for a strike that has low odds of winning won't help at all. It certainly won't help you rank up, so I advise you not to. With that being said, it is incredibly fun to just snipe your opponent while they're not expecting it, so play how you want to play. There's no shame in having fun. The same risk management idea is true at the beginning of the game as well. Yes, moving to a bonus city you don't think they are can surprise them and help progress your game, but it's so risky. You're risking an automatic loss just for a bonus city at the beginning of the game. This can be useful when used sparingly, but shy away from risking your entire game right as the round starts. And after half an hour of talking about Two Spies, we are done. You are fully prepared to venture out to Europe and strike some secret agents. Of course, that's not everything about Two Spies, but that should be all you need to be a successful spy. Other strategies and tricks you'll need to figure out yourself by playing. Two Spies has their own tutorial that you should definitely play just to get the basics down. After you complete the How to Spy tutorial, you can play a couple warm-up games with the training bots to test out Two Spies. They have different levels of intelligence, ranging from harmless to harmful. Once you've beaten the bots, you're ready to move to Quick Match. This is where you face other spies from around the world. You are given a randomly assigned spy alias, then face another secret agent in Europe. After you complete 5 games, you will be given one of 5 different ranks: Cadet, Secret, Top Secret, Shadow, or 00. You'll be matched up with other spies similar to your rank and can change your rank depending on if you lose or win. You can also play in private matches against your friends. You can play online or locally with 2 devices, or play on 1 device with Pass and Play. Pass and Play puts a barrier between every turn, so there's still some secrecy even if you're on the same device. Two Spies has different missions that you can complete during your matches as well. Some missions are easy, like completing the tutorial, buying strike reports, and winning the game, but others take years of playing, like winning 10,000 matches or collecting 1 million intel, accomplishments that even I haven't completed. As you've watched, you've probably noticed the different pins in my examples. New players start with 3 basic pins, but you can buy different pins for $1 in the shop. Pins are purely cosmetic and won't give you an advantage at battle, except when they dazzle your opponent into submission. If you look good, you feel good, and if you feel good, you play good. Two Spies is free and doesn't have any ads, so this is the only revenue that the developers earn. If you're feeling generous or just want to look cool, consider buying a pin. And that is Two Spies. If you're interested in communicating with other spies, consider joining the Two Spies Discord. We discuss strategies, hold tournaments, give advice to newcomers, give game suggestions, and hold matches. It's nice to be able to talk with your opponent after a game, and we're all very nice. And if you want more Two Spies content, consider subscribing. I have former matches on this channel, including the Two Spies tournament finals between Red Puma and Tame Orion, and my first placement match of Season 5. I'll have more videos coming soon with voiceovers, including match analyses and other guides, so make sure to subscribe if you want to see those. Thank you for watching the Two Spies tutorial, and good luck striking, spies.